Hi, welcome. This is Glenda Dawson, and I have Moongirl with me, and we are the Paranormal Dolls. We are streaming on the Glenda's Magical Creations channel on the Conscious Awakening Network on Roku TV, Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV, and various other streaming platforms. We like to take this moment to thank you for following us. If you see us on YouTube, please like the channel so you can be notified of any future podcast, and just send us emails, notifications. Either one of us will be more than willing to accept it and get back to you as soon as we can. So, Moon Girl, sweetheart, you look good today.
Thank you. You guys both look beautiful.
Yeah.
Excited to have our guest, Courtney, the best historian ever.
There you go. Courtney, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You look fantastic.
Handcuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I love
well, it's been like I live in Connecticut and it's been 30 degrees until today. It hit 80, so we're like very excited.
it. Yes. Well, I live in Pennsylvania, so I understand. Today, right now we have 73, but the sun is really strong.
Yeah.
And it's so beautiful. You go around with the windows down, get that fresh air.
Yes.
It's not freezing. Wonderful. So why don't you just start by telling us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll take it from there.
Sure. So again, I'm Courtney McInvale. I live in Mystic, Connecticut, and I am the founder of Seaside Shadows Haunted History Tours. I started Seaside Shadows almost 10 years ago, and we focus on history and mystery, sharing the untold stories of New England's past, the dark things people encountered, the strange and unsolved things, and then ways people experience the paranormal at those historic sites today. We do walking tours through downtown districts and in graveyards. We expanded last year to our neighbor in Rhode Island, and we're working to expand further south right now. I also write books, and I've been doing that since I started doing tours. So I started writing about Mystic and then Connecticut, and now I'm writing about war, like Civil War ghosts at haunted battlefields, and doing a series called Bury My Bones about that. And I just finished writing about Georgia. So those are kind of the things that keep me really busy. And then I also do mediumship readings for people. So kind of a trifecta of supernatural things.
I wanted to add, not only is she a gifted a spiritual medium, she's also been featured as a historian and medium on the Travel Channel's Ghost Adventures and Portals to Hell. So that's really, really fun.
Yeah, that's been so fun. I loved that. Yeah.
So how did you come to this place? How did you get to where you are now?
What sparked your interest in becoming like a historian? You didn't just wake up one day to the next and like, I history.
Yeah. So growing up, I was an avid reader. That was something that I really loved. And my parents both read to me every single night as a child, but my dad was a history major. So he would like read to me from like history books as if they were, novels. And then the only novels he read me were Stephen King. So you can see where the two sort of intertwined.
Bedtime stories.
Yes.
Bedtime stories.
So Stephen King in history books, it's no wonder I'm into like spooky history, right? So that always influenced me, I think, in a way. From a young age, I was just like set forth on this path. I studied history a lot in college as well. And when I studied abroad in Ireland, that was a big focus. So I really just kind of grew my love for it there. As for the paranormal, it's been in and out of my life. I grew up in a house with a lot of haunting activity, and then I ignored that. But then in other parts of my career, just more and more, not spooky, but spiritual things started happening. And I really just tried to intertwine them, the history and the unknown. How do they go together?
And they definitely have parallels.
Mm-hmm.
So I could see how one stirred your interest into the other, and it becomes a giant rabbit hole.
Yeah, it does, because you're not only learning about like the dark history and trying to explain modern paranormal activity, but if you really get into history, you're finding out what they believed spiritually, how they connected with spirit, and it just, like you said, snowballs kind of from there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's like when I go into a house, I don't go into a house like a normal paranormal investigator. I go in there and I ask the spirits, okay, what's your story? And that to me is worth $1,000,000 because you get to know of history that isn't written in the history books.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then you could just go to the historian places like the Historical Society here in Pennsylvania and then prove whatever has happened. And you could find the graves and you could find the history and you could find the family trees and all that stuff, which to me, I don't know, that's what calls me more into it.
Right. And I feel like I'm so glad you mentioned that. Even when I hire guides, I don't call them guides, I call them storytellers. Like,
Right.
our job is to share the stories of the past to ensure that these people are remembered. I love this line in like the Hamilton musical, like in one of the songs where he's like, who lives, who dies, who tells your story,
Right.
you know? And I, every time I hear that, I'm like, I'm the one that tells your story, you know? That's like, feels like my purpose.
Yeah, very good.
The beauty of being mediums, because she's also a medium, we like going, all of us, I think we all do this, all three of us at least. Like paranormal equipment is awesome. It's fine. I get why people who are maybe not in tune as much as we are, they need that, visual evidence. But as mediums, like going into it like using our mediumship when we're like investigating. And yes, the lights are awesome and everything, but you really feel what's going on and see or whatever, smell, whatever. And then that's how we kind of tell their story.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really interesting to me how that's something that we have in common, that I really like that very much about all three of us.
And if you're talking to historic spirits, I mean, like me, I'm always in old houses and battlefields. These spirits, like if we're operating under the assumption that they're the spirits of people who lived in the past, right? Like that's a theory. Mm-hmm. So why would they be like really excited to see all these gizmos and gadgets that are making noise and lighting up if that was not something that was happening in their time? That could be confusing and weird. Whereas if we come as people trying to speak, that could open up that opportunity to communicate much better.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Very true. Yes, I like I said, and Moongirl said, we're not trying to put down the people who do the machines. Everybody does it differently.
Well, we use them. We use them.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Use them.
I use them with my guests all the time. I like let the kids run around with Boo Buddy and all these things, and it's fun. And like you were saying, it's kind of like a visual, thing for them, and that's really how a lot of people learn and process. So in that way, if it's getting them just used to trying to communicate with spirit, but having a tool to help them do so, elevates that experience, then great, go for it.
Mm-hmm.
Also, you can tell people till you're blue in the face that you see a ghost, you see a spirit, whatever. But until they it's good to have the little the lights and stuff to show that, hey, look, it really is true. I'm not just talking out of my behind. You can see. So I can see how that helps people with that a lot. But yeah, we use both. We love both.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If I'm saying something to you that's like spooky, or that I see a spirit and then the EMF starts flashing, or we hear a voice come through the SB7, that's really exciting. It validates, corroborates what I'm saying, and then the guests are able to be a part of that experience.
Mm-hmm. Now, it states that, I heard through the grapevines that you worked for the FBI. I gotta hear this.
Yeah. So I have the most strange origin story, I think, for being someone in the paranormal, in the sense that, like, yes, I grew up in a haunted house, but I went to college after that and I studied politics and history. And during college, I had an internship opportunity because I went to school in Washington, D.C. With NCIS. And I think like most people, we, or at least a lot of us women, we like true crime. So I was like, absolutely want to be involved. What's going on here? And, you know, when you're a kid, you don't realize how real it is until you get into that internship. And I interned in cold case homicide. And that was just like really eye-opening, and that was something I loved, finding pieces of the puzzle that other people didn't see, using my intuition to see if that could help guide me to pieces of the puzzle. But it was just an internship, right? But I loved it. So I started applying to any government agencies that I felt were similar after I finished my internship, because that was, you know, toward the end of my college.
Right.
And then FBI just happened to be having what they call a hiring blitz, where they were going to universities and seeing who was qualified and like pulling us out. And I really credit my NCIS internship with being like, you know, what made me stand out in the applicant pool. And my mom was a teacher and made me get good grades my whole life, so that helped. So I, you know, put in for the FBI at that point, and they hired me. It took a couple years to get a security clearance, but I was not put in something that I really wanted. It was like what they needed, which was counterterrorism at that time. So that was, you know, in the mid to late 2000s. So you have to remember, like 9/11 was still really fresh. Counterterrorism was really developing in the federal agencies. So that's where they were really trying to push all us new folks into. And that's ended up being where I went into, and it was fine. I did my job, but I just wasn't really feeling like connected to my work. And the other thing, like the other like weird practical reality, is that it was in DC, and you commute no matter how close you live to that building, at least an hour to work each day, if not more, on a crowded metro. And your whole life is just commuting, working, commuting, go to bed. And I was like, I am 23 years old. This is not it. You know?
Yes.
So I stayed there, and then I got a contract opportunity at Homeland Security. Again, I was just kind of piggybacking. And I got to live in Vermont, which was much better for me. I love the beat of Vermont. It's cool. It's beautiful. There's music, the lake. But I just also was not jamming with my work. So I met a lady in Vermont and who ran ghost tours and wrote ghost books. Her name's Thea Lewis. She still does it. She's fabulous. And I said, Thea, like, you're amazing. Can I have lunch with you and just pick your brain? And she like mercifully said yes. And I just sat with her, and she told me how she got started doing what she did, and was very encouraging that I could do this near where I was from in Connecticut. And so, you know, much to the dismay of my family, I quit all my government positions and said, I'm starting ghost tours. And I, you know, packed up and moved and did that. So, you know,
never look back.
No, I don't. There's like one of my favorite Creedence Clearwater songs is like, left a good job in the city, working for the man every night and day. But it follows up and says, never lost a minute of sleep. And I'm like, me either. Like, it's fine.
Love CCR.
Yes. So I didn't lose sleep over it. I think my mom lost sleep over it, but I didn't. And that's how we got here.
It's following your passion, right?
Yes. And I felt like it was me, but I do believe in like a greater purpose being pulled and pushed. And I don't know that I could envision my life not spending it with historic spirits and sharing stories and being out there experiencing my life in the way that I am. And I mean, for whatever it's worth, I'm kind of controlling, so I don't do well working for other people anyway. So it was probably best that I did
air sign thing, which again, Libra, Gemini, Aqua, Pisces.
I just don't like, if you tell me what to do, my deep desire is to not do it. You know what I mean? So it's just
On
best
purpose.
I do my thing. Right.
And if you tell me not to do it, that's my green light to do it.
Right. And it's not, when you're working for the government, that's apparently not like the personality you're supposed to have. I remember like at FBI Academy, they had us all take, that Myers-Briggs personality test. You guys heard of that?
Yes.
And I got ENFP, okay, which makes sense for me. I was the only one in my entire academy class that got that, which was a problem because we were supposed to work with other people whose brains work the same as ours. And my brain didn't work like everybody else's there. And that was probably like my red flag. Like, this is not your jam. You're more intuitive, like in your perception, you're more feeling connected, and they are definitely better at other things. I'm not saying it's bad, but regimented, figuring out things, like putting things in order. And that's just, I'm a chaos brain. It's not me.
Well, speaking of spirituality, what first got you into the spiritual community? Like, when did you first notice you had like spiritual gifts? You mentioned that you've seen spirits since you were a child. So
I grew up in a house that had a lot of haunting activity for a whole plethora of reasons, not the least of which, in addition to being a police officer, my dad ran a business called Postmortem Cleanup, and we lived in an old house. So,
cool. Oh my gosh.
We're going to talk about that. We're going to go back to that.
There was a lot going on there that I think I call it the perfect storm. But I figured, because my friends and my family also had experiences in the house, that like we all saw them. Like, I didn't think it was special to me, right? Like, we all were experiencing weird things. But when the activity kind of got frightening, my mom, she really was nervous because at that point she had separated from my father and she had 3 girls in the house. And she was just like, I'm kind of frightened by this activity, but, this is our home. Like, kind of like, what am I supposed to do with this? And then one day when my rosary beads broke, she got like really worried that something like sinister was happening. If you can't tell by my red hair, I'm Irish Catholic family, right? So she was very worried about this. And so she ended up calling priests, pastors, you name it. But it eventually led toward calling the Warren family, because they're in Connecticut too. And when Lorraine came to the house, she was the one that sort of turned my family, including me, onto the idea that there was a familial gift in our family to see spirits that she picked up on. And so she kind of phrased it that, like, though she would be assisting in getting rid of negative entities, our family still would experience spiritual things because of, our nature. So I think that's, definitely when I started figuring out there was more, but at that time I was not interested in pursuing that. If that makes sense. Like, it was like, no, thank you. The Sixth Sense had just come out. No, I'm not the girl who sees dead people. I lived in a very small town, and now you guys have probably noticed. I mean, you have a podcast. The paranormal's cool now. It was not cool like then. It was not. It was like, you're a crazy person. Thanks, but no thanks. So we didn't really delve into it,
Oh, I understand that. Think of me. I am almost 62. It was even worse back then.
Right.
They would put you away.
Right.
If anybody in school heard about it or anybody near the family heard about it, you were sent away.
Right. And it's a frightening concept. And, my mom's, in her 60s too. And I think she was a teacher. My dad was a police officer. If we go around saying like the house is haunted, what does that say about this family in this small town? So it was a no, we don't talk about that and sweep it under the rug for, legitimate reasons, right? Like, it was perfectly legitimate. Now everyone and their mother has a ghost story. But it just wasn't the case back then that people were divulging them.
No, they would definitely want to lock you up and throw away the key. Yeah. And growing up in a Catholic family, the majority, I'm Hispanic, so the majority of us are Catholic. And that was a huge taboo I grew up with a very religious grandmother, and they would not believe me until they finally saw what I told them. And after that, they never questioned me again. But
But
it's very terrifying to have, like, you're going to be put away if you don't, so I could see why people would not want to come forth with that information.
right, right. And that's always been interesting to me about Catholicism. I think more than like anything else, because Catholics, we have so much mystery in a mass. Like, we say a prayer and then this wafer becomes the body of Christ through the process of transubstantiation. If that's not spiritual or magical, I don't know what is. You know what I mean?
There's definitely parallels, and I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah, it's just, I tell folks, my husband comes from like a Christian family that's not Catholic, but like more, I would call it like, I call them biblical literalists. You know what I mean? And they make Catholics look like, I don't know what I'm doing out there. But so I tell people Catholics are probably the most magical in the Christian, umbrella.
Well, I'm Cuban. I was born in Cuba, and Catholic religion and spiritualism are hand in hand. It's like you have saints and then saints, and then you have, like Jesus on the cross, and then you have certain deities over here, and it's like, and I'm thinking to myself, well, I wasn't born Catholic. I went to Catholic school, but I wasn't born Catholic. I was born evangelist. And then when we came over here, we went into Northern Baptist, which is a very quiet type of church. There's only like a piano and an organ. There isn't like a faux band and this whole thing. And, there isn't speaking in tongues and all that other stuff.
Oh, no,
And
that's wild.
Yeah. And I'm like, okay, I can deal with this for now. Got thrown out of, I got thrown out of Sunday school.
I would say too, like, even around the time that my house was going through activity was around the time that I was getting confirmed, which is like, when you basically, it's one of your sacraments, right? In Catholicism. Mm-hmm. And when you get confirmed, you have to pick a saint who is like like you get another middle name. Right. And I picked Joan of Arc because I loved her, that she was like this badass woman who led an army of men. Like, she was so cool. But if you look at Joan of Arc's story, the reason she was burned at the stake is because she was communicating with other saints who had died, and their souls were speaking to her. And I think I felt that connection with her then, and I didn't necessarily know why. And as I've gotten older, I've understood that more, So that was interesting too.
I kind of want to touch back on what Glenda said, that we have saints and we have saints and stuff like that. But a lot of people who are Catholic, and again, one of my grandma's from Veracruz, the other one's from Victoria, Mexico. And even though they were Catholic, trust me, all the little Catholic church friends ladies, but they would still go with curanderas. They would still go get cards read. They would still do things that you know what I mean? That other religions might have frowned upon. So that's what I'm telling you. There's parallels that maybe they didn't want to look at, or whatever the case may be, but there was definitely parallels there. Okay,
well, to put it nicely from a history perspective, our ancestral cultures were blended in to the Christian movement when it came out for a reason, but they were never fully able to tell these cultures, whether, like it was Celtic like mine or Norse, it doesn't matter. Right. They could never say to you, get rid of who you are and where you came from. Mm-hmm. Instead, they had to say, okay, we're going to shift how you do this into our narrative, right? And so we're always going to have that crossover.
And to this day, people still use the huevo to like curarte de ojo. Yeah. The egg cleanse, and it didn't matter if you were, religious or not. So again, there's parallels here. Just saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I got married in Ireland. I lived in Ireland. If you tell me those people don't believe in like banshees and fae and things like that, yes. They do. And there is this sense when you're there that, They are here because culturally it's always been real for them. So, you know,
Well,
even though you're Irish Catholic, you still have your fairies and you still have your banshees and you still have all of these supernatural elements that play a role in your daily life and understanding your practice of leaving an empty chair out, you know, on All Hallows Eve for your loved one to come back, putting the candle in the window for them to find you. Like that's still very spiritual, but not religious, right?
And then we leave our altars for that too as well. So there's a lot of things here that, you know, whatever.
It's interesting, right? It's interesting. I love it. During COVID, I did this video series where it was called Witchy Wednesday. And what I did was I found like the original gods and goddesses, mythology or beliefs that were associated with use of varying herbs or holidays. And I told people how those were connected, but really how cool they were that they were connected and how meaningful it was. And I would, you know, I would just like put a cauldron over a fire and I'd like make some herbal thing based on an old ritual. But it would be funny how like rosemary had all these ancient origins with all these goddesses, but then it was rosemary that was, you know, crowned on Jesus and that was used to wash his feet and things like that. So it comes through all of these spiritual and religious practices to still impact us today. And that's what unites us, you know, at the end. It's pretty neat.
Circle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And too bad people don't see that. You know, they only see what separates us instead of what unites us.
They want to demonize, you know.
Yeah, everything is. By the way, a banshee I experienced too, and they're no fun.
No,
but they're my pals now. They're my pals now, so I work with them when I need to.
Oh,
and they're my protectors when I need protection. And but
Glenda.
Good for you. I work with my dead soldiers and call it a day. Like when I need help, I'm like, I got to call one of the generals in here. So.
Wow. Speaking of generals in history, can you tell some of your like favorite ghostly historical stories?
Oh my gosh.
You have so many.
I have so many. I'm trying to think. So actually, I'll just talk about the guy on the wall behind me. So that's a portrait of Ulysses S. Grant and his family. And I adore him for a whole bunch of historical nerdy reasons. But basically, he was a general in the Civil War. But after the Civil War, he helped with Reconstruction. But he was one of the people who refused to divide the nation any further and wanted to make sure he still spoke with both sides and humanized everything and did his best to bring the country together. So I love him for that. But of course, he's a follow-up to Abraham Lincoln. And during the war, Lincoln is, you know, the chief of the country because he's the president. So he makes all of these decisions. And Ulysses S. Grant is a general, so that comes down to him. At the conclusion of the war, they're celebrating their victory with the Union. And Ulysses S. Grant's wife, Julia, was a psychic. She was a psychic medium, and she participated in seances. Abraham Lincoln's wife, Mary Todd, did as well participate in seances, but she wasn't psychic like Julia. And they weren't friends. So they kind of like had a beef with each other. They didn't like each other. I love old gossip. It's so funny.
Glenda, even back then. Even back then.
Yeah, we are not above it. Okay, we are not above it. So, and then, you know, to make it even weirder, Ulysses S. Grant's wife was friends with the wife of the president of the Confederacy. It was like, it was a whole little social circle that was weird. But moving past that, Abraham Lincoln, as we all know, gets assassinated at the Ford's Theater by John Wilkes Booth, right? But what we don't often know is that Julia Grant foresaw that her husband was going to be shot at that theater as well as the president. And so she said to her husband, I don't want you to go see the Lincolns today. They're going to invite you to a show and then you're going to get shot. And he said, we've already turned down their invitations because you haven't wanted to hang out with Mary Todd, you know, like I've got to go. And she's like, we have to like come up with an excuse, go home and see our kids. Like, I'm telling you, it's life or death. And so he loves his wife. Like, he had courted her from a young age. And so he says, okay, I'll just tell them there's an emergency with one of the children and, we have to go. And he does. But before they leave New York that day where they were visiting, a messenger comes to the house and he says, you have to come see the president right away. And Julia gets a message. She says, don't even respond to this message. He's part of the group of people that are going to kill the president. Ulysses isn't sure about this, but he follows his wife. Better safe than sorry, doesn't want to make her mad.
And let that be a lesson to all the men out there.
Yes.
Listen, because that's what happens. It's that very night Lincoln goes, he gets shot by John Wilkes Booth, and one of the people that was charged with conspiracy was one of the people that tried to deliver that message to Julia. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, what I love about that story is the intuition and the personal level of it. Yes. But at the same time, Lincoln also had a premonition of his own death. For nights before he died, he envisioned himself going to the opposite wing of the White House. People were mourning, crying. And he said, who died? And they said, the president. He was shot. And this happened like 3 nights before he died, every single night. Mm. So, I mean, just even these spiritual stories that we can't deny that really happened. But even as I go through stories from history, like those are like highlights because they were big names. Mm-hmm. But if you go through stories of history, it is filled with people who had, like, the soldiers see other soldiers on the battlefield leading them forward. Parents whose children were lost at war suddenly see the apparition of their child telling them where their body is, and they're able to find it there. It's just these really, miraculous stories of human spirit and connection, being a triumph over everything else. But listen to your wife, listen to the spirit, listen to your intuition. If they're that specific, they're not wrong.
Let that be a lesson to all the husbands out there.
And boyfriends.
Yeah.
Everybody.
It's funny because Ulysses S. Grant was called like the butcher, like a hard ass, all these terrible things. But like if you read about him and his wife, it's just like such this soft demeanored man, and really like she knows the shots. Like they started dating, and the only reason she would date him is because her like pet bird died, and he gave it a full funeral with like military honors and had all his friends come, and then she was like, okay, I'll date you. But
I'll date you.
But what's funny is she was not aesthetically beautiful by our standards, right? She even had like a lazy eye and stuff. She was really self-conscious about it. And she had found out about like a treatment that would have helped women with it. And she told her husband, like, I think I'm going to do this. If I'm going to be first lady, I just don't want to embarrass you, Right. And he was like, the only thing that would have embarrassed me is if you touch any part of yourself. Like, you are perfect. And so I think, so when you see portraits of her, she always has one side because she wouldn't let anybody like paint or take a picture of that other side of her. But he also wouldn't let her change it. So just those human things that make history relatable are also my favorite things.
Well, now I like him more, lady.
Oh, he's fabulous, and he's handsome. I think he's handsome.
Now I'm gonna have to steal him from you. He has. I thought we were in tie with Lincoln because she has a picture of her hovering over Lincoln, and then I have one too, and I even put like, "Oh, Mr. Lincoln," and we didn't know that we had this of each other. Do you remember?
Yes. Well, Mary Todd, I don't know if I were to get involved in my 19th century beef. I'm like, I hope I don't get haunted for this, but I would pick Julia Grant over Mary Todd Lincoln. I would. Ooh. I trust her judgment.
Obviously, her intuition was on point.
Her intuition's on point. Her husband is less divisive, but also more able to speak his mind. And so I just really liked their dynamic, and they were real, Like, I feel like the Grants didn't really come from much. Mm-hmm. And they didn't leave this world with much, but they loved each other and they did their best. And every time I just wrote a book about Confederates, right? All these Confederates had nothing but good things to say about Grant and also spoke at his funeral. So I just love someone that like their humanity changes that divide. Those earthly things don't matter. Our common humanity matters. And I think that's why I love him so much.
Oh, I love this story. Well, speaking of books, you're an author, a Polish author. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your books?
Sure. So
my
first book was Haunted Mystic, about the little seafaring town I give tours, and not so little anymore. It's getting quite big, but it's still little to me. And about the haunts there and a lot of things on my tour. And then the publisher suggested I look into the Revolutionary War. So I wrote Revolutionary War Ghosts of Connecticut, where I traveled to all these haunted places, schoolhouses, mansions, things like that in my home state that had revolutionary connections, like where John Hancock was married, where Nathan Hale taught, just things like that. And I looked to see where Benedict Arnold was, you know, all these people. And I found really fascinating stories and wrote about my experiences there. And then I really wanted to write about Civil War ghosts. That's what my dad kind of raised me on, being a Georgia good old boy himself. So I really wanted to write about that. But my first publisher was like, you have to write about soldiers from Connecticut because that's where you live. And I was like, okay, but all right, whatever. So I did. And I wrote about some great, you know, Union guys. And that's really how I learned about Grant, even though he's not from here. He was a Union leader. And I decided when I was writing that there were just so many stories to be shared of these men as I was uncovering each of their lives, the people that loved them, what they did, the paranormal. I was like, I have to do more. So I wrote Civil War Ghosts of Connecticut. I wrote it so long I had to change publishers. I switched to a paranormal person, Mike Rixiker from Haunted Road Media. He's amazing. And he was like, this is great. We're going to run with it. And then I sent it to him and I said, here's the thing, Mike. Now I want to write about more Civil War ghosts. And he was like, that's going to be a lot. I said, I know. I'll be doing it till I die, but it's fine. And so we created the Bury My Bones series, which is going to go through different states. And I just submitted the manuscript for Civil War Ghosts of Georgia, which hopefully will come out later this year. And that was just a dream come true. It was all new haunts, amazing stories, and openness to spirit. Like, there was no shortage of stories there. So that was my most recent one that's coming out, and I'm very excited about it.
Yay!
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And what I like is that you're bringing stories out that is interesting, not the boring stuff that, you know, we get told in school and you're like, you know, real life.
And I think that's the thing is, like, history is fascinating. It's how we've been told it. Yes. That is where we've dropped the ball. We tell people you have to remember dates and names. We don't tell people these are people like you who had a life worth sharing with you. So my goal is to just, like, I just telling it in a better way. That's all.
With spice.
Right. Like, no one's going to tell you that Julia Grant was a psychic or about the bird's funeral, but, like, I love that stuff. I love it, you know? Like,
Courtney is an honorary Latina. She brings the spices.
I did a whole chapter in the most recent book because this one regiment brought a dog with them everywhere. And, like, they all just wrote about their experiences bringing this dog and how this dog meant so much to them. And I thought, that's like us too. They're not just men out on the field. They want this piece of home. They want this unconditional love. Like, just these stories that show us that we've always been human, you know? So I love finding them, finding stuff that hasn't been shared. I'd probably do an unpopular thing, though, which is, like, some ghost stories that are popular in areas aren't real. And I will just flat out call them out in my book and be like, there are real ghosts here, but it's not this, you know? And not everybody loves that because they want to perpetuate it. And I'm like, it's a fine legend, but this legend isn't based in truth.
But see, I love that. So we're okay.
you and I went and investigated in Gettysburg, and it was a lot of fun. We have to do it again sometime. And I totally relate to that because some places that were known to be haunted, I didn't pick anything up. And then other places that we went, I was like, oh my God, it's right there. Or this is here. And we just kept seeing all these things. So, in that sense, I want to ask you, what are your top 3 places that you would like to investigate that you have not yet, and why? Before we leave you.
Oh my gosh, that's so hard. So on the Civil War note, I would really still, I haven't made it to Vicksburg or Shiloh, which are both big places for my boy Grant, so I've got to go. But I just also know that they were really definitive for the Civil War in the sense of how many people were lost there, and especially in the beginning of the war. So I really want to, you know, connect with those souls who, like, going into it didn't know what to expect. In addition to that, overseas, I've always been drawn to a couple of places. I lived in Ireland for a while. I've always loved studying the rebellions. I'm from a rebel family, so I've loved studying rebellions. And there was a place called Kilmainham Jail where a bunch of the men who did the Easter Rising of 1916 were executed. And they're kind of like heroes of mine. So, and that place is spooky and dark, but it also just, like, I just feel this sadness there. So I'd love to investigate there and find out what they need to say. One of them even got married right before he was executed in that cell. I would love to, like, see that, you know? And then also I've visited, but I haven't investigated in Scotland, Culloden, which is where the Jacobite Rising took place. And I visited there on the anniversary of the battle, and which is weirdly my wedding anniversary too, but it's strange.
It was meant to be.
But when I was there, I was already picking up on experiences, and my intuition was telling me that some of the signs were wrong that were there. And my tour guide was like, yeah, this isn't actually where this happened. This is, and it's where my, like, gut was telling me it was. So I would really like to experience that too, because that was really Scotland's last sort of gasp for independence. Until modern day, they're talking about it again. But I think I'd like to check that out too. I'm a history nerd, so they're all historic places. But I would love to do those places.
Sounds like you have it set, and I could hear your passion into it. So that's going to be when you decide to write about those places.
I know. I'm going to be writing constantly.
Let me know, because then I'm going to be like, okay, see, it's not what they say. I knew there was more.
There's always more. There's always more.
Right.
Do you have any upcoming projects or events?
Yes. So right now we're running our tours in Mystic and in Westerly. We are looking to expand to get a trolley to go down on the beach, which would be really, really cool for some haunted tours, because there's always ghosts coming out of the water. So we got to go talk about them, you know, from all those shipwrecks and pirates. And then I am also working on getting tours started in Georgia, which I'm just so pumped about. And I want them to kind of coincide with the books and things. So I'm working on that. I'm working on more books, of course, but those are like my big expanding the company things that I have going on right now. For smaller events, myself and John Zaffis are going to this September be investigating a historic library built by an old sea captain, and we're going to be it will be open to the public. So we're really excited to have that coming up this September, and also another one in November in Rhode Island. So just those things are exciting, and we'll be probably bringing back some really cool pub crawls and stuff at haunted bars soon too.
Nice.
Fun. Glenda and I need to go take a little tour.
Yes, I think we do.
Yes, anytime. The ghosts are always there. They don't go
now
anywhere.
that you have a trolley thing going on, I really...
Well, we're hoping, fingers crossed. Like, I'm waiting.
Okay.
I'm waiting at the meeting for it. But I just think it would be really good, because this town used to have a trolley back in the day Then in 1938, there was this enormous hurricane and it blew everything away, like literally, including the trolley and the tracks and a bunch of people. So it was really bad, but they've never rebuilt the trolley. And I think it would help connect because it's got a beautiful downtown, but the beaches there in Rhode Island are just gorgeous. And I want to be able to connect those two parts of the community.
Very good. Yeah, sounds like a plan.
I'm always working on it. I'm always trying to come up with stuff.
Well, that's what keeps you going and gives you that passion that you can see and you can feel as you're talking about everything. It just lights you up. So.
Oh, I love it. I'm just such a nerd, but I love history and I love sharing stories with other people and helping them to connect, you know, seeing their faces when they realize that it's not boring is really great.
And I think we're all in agreement. We love that part of history, the ones that is not told in books.
Yes.
That's what we really love.
Except my books. Except my books. It's in my books.
Okay, your books.
I put the interesting stuff in there, I promise. I promise.
Courtney's books, the books of truth. First Testament. No, just kidding.
You have to do it right because let's face it. History class for me was like, oh, you got to be kidding me. There's more to that. I know there's more to that.
And it's funny. I feel like too, you know, we mentioned like going to Gettysburg and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But even like, so in Gettysburg, all the places they say are the most haunted is BS. But the real places are out there where the people died. And, mm-hmm. you know, it's like we just ignore that. It's like weird. But when you go out to places, it's like people are expecting some, I don't know, like bombastic thing, like to constantly hear cannons and hear people screaming and moaning on the ground. But for me, it's like when I go to a battlefield, it's like the sense of being watched, the footsteps, the deer or the animals that stand precisely in a certain spot, looking at you as if they're representative of that spirit. It's those things that really get me more, that I feel happen rather than just this, you know, constant noise or barrage of sadness. It's like a consistent presence and these very spiritual ways of showing us.
Mm-hmm.
Although when we did go, we actually ended up hearing a cannon. If you remember,
it can happen. And I always feel bad because it's like sometimes I try to like not like trigger them to like get a little more involved. So if people really want to hear cannon or gunfire, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play like Yankee Doodle or Dixie and like get them like riled. But I also feel bad doing that because I don't want them to think that it's happening again, you know? So It's like, I want to meet them where they're at. If they are still in battle, that's one thing. If they are looking to communicate, that's another. Like, I really want to meet spirits where they're at and be someone they're comfortable speaking with. And that's how I'm going to learn the most, you know? So that's just important to me. But I think they show themselves in funny ways. Like my husband, he still stands by that a spirit made him do this, though I don't know. But there's a Southern general, Stonewall Jackson. He's controversial, blah, 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 whatever. I was looking for him and his ghost. And so I was traveling around to like where he was shot for his mortal wound, where they amputated his arm, where they buried his arm, where he died, where he lived. Like I was looking everywhere for his ghost, right? And I thought the fact that his arm had his own cemetery stone was really fun. So I really wanted to find it. I wanted to find the grave for his arm.
I was about to ask you, did you take a picture?
I do. I'll send you. I have a picture of me.
Yes!
So
That is so awesome.
And I'm like, yeah. I'm
now
like,
I want to do that. I want to go and do.
Yes. Yeah. I was pumped. And it just says Stonewall Jackson's arm and you have me. I'm like, with it. I'm like so excited. Like I found a celebrity. And it's just his arm. But while we're there looking for his arm, Like, don't do this at home, whoever's listening. If you
We're
are
just
going
looking for his arm.
if you're going to a national park, don't go in at sunset. Like, you'll get trapped in the dark. You could get in trouble. Just don't do it. I did. And I was like, I didn't realize how far away his arm would be. So I
was like saying, not as I do, children. Okay.
Exactly.
I was like, oh my God, like I'm walking to this park, the sun is setting, the animals are all out looking at me like, what's this woman doing? I'm like, I want to find his arm. I find this house, I find these cornfields, I go through the cornfields and there's this little cemetery and there's his arm. So I took a picture, investigated a little, and then my husband was like, it's getting really dark, we're gonna get in trouble and going back to the car. He's a rule follower much more than I am, right?
Wait, I need to ask you something. Did you ask the arm any questions?
I did. And I don't know that the arm answered, but Stonewall definitely
Somebody out there answered.
Somebody answered. And to be clear, the arm is buried by other people.
Or
It's just one arm. He has nothing else.
the
Other arm, this arm is buried near Chancellorsville. Him and his other arm are buried near Lexington. Anyway, I've seen both arms. But
that's another story for another day. Yes.
That's another story for another day. So I'm there with his arm in the graves. Marty's my husband. He's headed back to the car. He's like, this crazy woman's going to get us arrested at a national park at night. And I'm like sitting there with my spirit box, like, hello, you know? And finally, I got a little nervous too, because I was like, I don't know where I am. And I don't want to like get stuck out here. So I finally start going down the path back toward the car, and I hear like the corn like stalks rustling, and then they like moved like really heavy, and I thought, this is it. Like, this is how I go. Like, I don't know if it's a bear coming out of there. I don't know if it's Stonewall Jackson, but this is how I leave this earth. Like, whatever's coming out of there, it's going to take me. And then,
arm and all.
Yeah, Marty runs out of there laughing hysterically. Naturally, I smack him and then I hug him because I'm upset because I'm scared. And I'm so I needed to express both emotions. And then we go back to the car, and the next day we tour Stonewall Jackson's house. And the tour guide says to us, do you guys ever play pranks on each other? And I'm like, oh, let me tell you, it's a cornfield. And she goes, well, Stonewall Jackson used to hide behind the doors in his house and jump out at his wife and try to scare her. And Marty goes, he made me do it. I was like, generous. Yeah. But I definitely think spirits do play with us, and they know what we're doing out there for sure. And he knew I was looking for his arm. And
by the way, we call Marty the husband because when we're out there, he was filming us. So
yes,
he's the husband of the paranormal.
yes. And
we love Marty.
We do love Marty. Marty does no time for my antics sometimes, but they continue anyways. But you too can visit Stonewall Jackson's arm, and it's free to go to should you ever need a haunted place. Sorry, my dog.
We died, Courtney. So you have to come with.
Sorry, 1 second. Let me get him. 1 second. Oh, he sees. I live in like the woods, and there's deer and bear, and
it's okay.
Mine's barking too. Mine's barking up a storm over
there. Yeah. They bark at everything.
Everything, and he's part like beagle, part Jack Russell. So it's like,
so he hears.
It's constant.
Yeah.
It's constant. Sometimes I'm like, that's why my shades are pulled mostly, because like he'll look out the window at the bunnies and just get mad that they exist. I'm like, it's a beautiful day. I can't even have my windows open.
The bunny.
Yes.
Oh Lord.
He's not barking at arms. He's barking at them.
Not arms. Although Stonewall Jackson is also on my wall, ironically next to Ulysses S. Grant. And if anyone who knows anything about history is listening to this, they're going to be like, this woman is insane. But I like to think that in the afterlife, they have made amends. That's what I like to think.
I
They're
am
friends.
sure they have. I am sure they have.
Yeah.
They're
Yes.
probably going like, "Why were you angry at me? I don't know. Why were you angry at me?"
Why are we on this crazy woman's wall? Like,
Where's my arm?
where's my? I think it's so funny. Like, he was shot, right, and by friendly fire, meaning like his own side didn't recognize him in the dark. Bad. But and then they're carrying him on like this, stretcher type thing that they've assembled together through the woods for 35 miles. Like, why? Find a hospital tent 2 miles away. What is happening? Naturally, they drop him several times during this process, thus making the wound infected. So by the time they amputate the arm, he's toast, like it doesn't matter. But if they hadn't have dropped him, they said he would have lived, and then Gettysburg would have gone differently. But that's, interesting to think. Maybe in another world, and what would that look like?
Yeah, all I know is that I'm with you girls. When I went to Gettysburg, the few times I've gone, where everybody says they see, they hear, and all that other stuff, I'm like, dead zone. I go into a side road or just a little side area, and I see soldiers coming up to me. I see this and I see that.
A
And
lot of them weren't found, right? Like a lot of them weren't found, and those are the ones we're going to hear about. I just uncovered a really great Gettysburg story, and I'll end it with you guys. Like these two soldiers, opposite sides. The Union guy's really injured. He starts calling out for help on the wheat field, which is where I have the most spiritual experiences. Buddy, hold on 1 second. I'm sorry, you're going to have to.
Glenda, we need to go find that damn arm.
I know, we need to go find the arm. That's more interesting than anything else. Mute yourself there.
I have him next to me now. But okay, so the Union guy was injured on the wheat field. It's the day after battle. He's calling out for help. One of the Confederate guys hears him and feels bad for him because he's like laying in Gettysburg happened in July, so he was laying in the blazing sun, and so he feels bad and he goes over there and he says, like, what do you need? And he's like, I need water. So he gives him water. And then he says, can you bring me back to shelter? To which the Confederate guy is like, if I bring you back with me, your guys are going to shoot me, right? And he's like, no, they won't. But he's scared about it. They're only like 21 years old at the time. Like, we forget how young they are. So the Confederate guy starts crawling with the Union guy on his back, brings him back to the Confederate lines, gives him food, helps care for him. And then he props him up against a tree because his leg is mangled. He doesn't look like he's going to recover. And he wishes him luck. And then the Union guys take him back and the Confederate guys go on their way. And we forget, like in war, like after the battle's over, they really don't like just attack each other for no reason. So they go their separate ways. And then later the Union guy survives, and he spends years looking for the Confederate guy that saved his life. Right before the Confederate guy dies in his 70s, like a month before they meet again. And the Union guy says, I will always love him for what he did for me. And Theodore Roosevelt gave them an award for basically bridging that divide. And so that story came from one of the most haunted places in Gettysburg. And I love it. Like, that to me is just as spiritual as anything spooky.
That is
a sweet story. I'm going to cry. I'm such a crybaby.
I know. I cried while I was writing the book. Sometimes I would leave and come back. Like, yeah. I love it.
That's what it's all about, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
For sure. You're still human and you're still being treated as human. So.
And people really loved each other and they wanted everything to be okay. And that's all we want to.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Courtney.
We
love you. This is great. We definitely got to meet up with you.
Yes.
And take a tour, and then you give us directions on how to find the arm.
Yes, that's in Virginia. That's in Virginia, but I will.
No, I don't care.
While we're there, there's any legs that we can go look 4 as well. We're down.
Yeah, so I investigated a place recently that has a limb pit. So just arms and legs,
Okay.
Perfect.
willy-nilly. Yeah,
Perfect.
Sounds perfect. You got to send us that information.
These are the things I find. So I'm happy to share.
Stay with us for a second. Thank you very much. We love you. We love our audience. Thank you, Moon Girl. As always, you look gorgeous. Courtney, your glow is wonderful. Thank you very much.
And I love both of
Love
you.
you. Blessings.